What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, we have got a lot to get to. We've got new offensive coordinator at Georgia. We've got a new offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. We've got a new offensive coordinator at Miami, a new offensive coordinator at Maryland, a lot of new offensive coordinator hires. And then we're going to talk about returning production in college football. A lot of people will cite returning starters. I think Bill Connelly of ESPN has an excellent formula for what does that actually mean? How much of your production returns to your team? So we're going to talk about some teams based on those numbers that we like or potentially selling stock in heading into next season. Just what teams stuck out when looking at that returning production list in college football. Daniel, we have to begin with the defending national champions, back-to-back defending national champions. Georgia, Todd Monken moves on to the NFL. Rusty Manziel of Dogs 24/7 said that he's not coming back to college, period. He wanted to go to the NFL. Obviously, with the current state of college football, much easier schedule in the NFL. Monken's getting up there in age, but Georgia did not take long, a couple hours to make official their hire for offensive coordinator. And he was already on the current staff, was previously on Georgia's staff, and it's Mike Bobo as OC. So, Daniel, what are your thoughts on Georgia losing Todd Monken and then hiring Mike Bobo as their offensive coordinator?
Yeah, so this is kind of that last little, rotation of the coaching carousel, if you will, is right when the NFL season's over. Everybody's kind of making their last, hires and everything like that. So we knew Todd Monken had been interviewing with a couple of different NFL teams. And one of his goals is to be an NFL head coach. And his next step in doing that is to go back to the NFL as an offensive coordinator, potentially in a better situation. So I think that, I think he'll probably be successful. He's been successful at most places he's been. Depends on the quarterback situation and it as far as that goes. But, what he's left behind is a team that feels very obviously they're top of college football right now, and they have developed so well on the offensive side of the ball for the first time, more or less on the offensive side of the ball, consistency. So I'm excited to see what Mike Bobo does. Obviously, he comes back after being probably in the most successful run of Georgia offense in recent history was his last couple years with Aaron Murray, and then in 2014 with Hudson Mason at quarterback, who very forgettable for most. Nothing, he wasn't a bad quarterback by any means, but he certainly was not an NFL prospect. So Georgia, part of the reason that Mark Richt got fired was Mike Bobo leaving, and that offense kind of being in disarray in 2015 opened the door for Kirby Smart to come back to Georgia. But as far as Bobo is concerned, him and Kirby Smart are close friends. As this happened, I kind of was able to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, and it seems like this may have been Kirby Smart's idea the whole time, bringing Bobo in as an offensive analyst last year. Most may have just thought it was just him looking out for his friend. He's got a good job. He came home. Bobo's son is actually an offensive lineman at Georgia now. So it kind of just seemed like keeping everything in the family, keeping the seat warm. But it was more or less, hey, we've got insurance for not if, but when Todd Monken leaves. So we'll see how things go. This will definitely be not only the most talent that Mike Bobo has ever coached on the offensive side of the ball, but specifically offensive line. This is just an unreal offensive line talent and depth that he has never seen. And for his type of offense, at least from what we've seen in the past, offensive line is extremely important. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. I picked up one note from Jake Rowe, I believe, of Dogs 24/7 mentioned it this week.
On 3 now.
On 3. That's right.
He
Shout
was.
out.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
was Dogs 247. on three. He said under Mike Bobo last time, Georgia's defense gave up 30 points or more 17 times. And I think I think he was like 9-8 in those games. So you think about how he had to outscore a bad defense so many times in that Mark Richt era. He's not going to have to do that so much. He's got the defensive side of the ball figured out. So I think in the past like 3 years, Georgia's only had that happen like 4 times where they've gone over 30 points. So, certainly there will be a shootout here or there, but it won't be the norm. So I think, from what I can see, I think Bobo is got the Georgia offense in really good hands.
Yeah. So, I had a question about like, does this leave a bad taste in your mouth if you're a Georgia fan? Well, number one, you're losing Monken. And I want to say that I don't think that's just going to be business as usual because Monken is one of the best play callers in football. And he showed that the last 2 seasons, last 3 seasons. But there's a reason the NFL wanted him. Multiple teams wanted him. So I don't think it's just you lose that and it's fine. Everything's fine. That being said, I think it's important that Bobo was there for the past year. I was going to highlight, he had 2 bad stints, right? South Carolina and Auburn after his Colorado State head coaching gig. But South Carolina, it was the season Muschamp got fired mid-season. So they also played 3 quarterbacks that year. Auburn, it was year 1 of the Harsin era, which we all know how that ended. So Harsin wasn't going to be the guy either. Mike Bobo holds the record for points scored during a season at Georgia while he was offensive coordinator, most points per game during a season. The offense dropped off a cliff after he left and actually led to Mark Richt getting fired the very next season when they didn't perform. Todd Monken speaks very highly of Mike Bobo. And Daniel, I just think Kirby Smart has earned the right to have my trust kind of openly at this point. I just think that when you win back-to-back national championships, you're probably going to make an okay call. Reportedly, Kirby Smart thought this was going to come last offseason, which is why Bobo was brought in. They expected Monken to leave last offseason, and you ended up getting 1 more season of him. So Bobo's been able to learn. Obviously, he's going to put his stamp on the offense, but there's continuity there, right?
Yeah.
Like he already had his stamp on the offense, even with Monken, like with input and stuff. The other important thing I want to highlight here is that Mike Bobo has been the primary recruiter for Dylan Raiola, the number 1 player in the 2024 class, who George is very much in on with Nebraska, potentially USC. So number 1 quarterback in the 24 class. They're obviously in the market. And the Raiola family speaks very highly of Bobo. They are close with the Staffords, and Matthew Stafford speaks very highly of Mike Bobo. So I think this is important for that recruitment as well. And that is something we will follow as he could potentially commit this spring. So always going to be a big deal when the number 1 player in the country commits. So we'll be sure to cover that here on the Extra Point. Be sure, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel if you're watching this on YouTube. If not, subscribe in your podcast feed. We'd love for you to like the video on YouTube if you're watching us there. Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We appreciate it. We've had a lot of new listeners recently. So we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with us here on the Extra Point. Daniel, Notre Dame, they've made an offensive coordinator hire, but there's some more to cover here because who everyone thought they were going to hire, they didn't. That was Andy Ludwig of Utah. Andy Ludwig is staying at Utah, but some backstory is that the reason he's staying is because Notre Dame did not want to pay, I think it's a $2.2 million buyout plus the buyout for his offensive line coach. Therefore, they promote from within. Now, here's the problem. Gerard Parker is who they promoted to offensive coordinator. He could be a great offensive coordinator. But the problem is now you've got this reputation and your fan base knows that the guy you wanted, you didn't hire only because you didn't want to pay up. Daniel, let me ask you something. If you're, we'll just pick a random school here, LSU, do you think $2 million is stopping you from hiring the offensive coordinator you want?
If you're LSU, $2 million is shipping and handling for that coach to show up on your front doorstep. They don't care about $2 million or whatever the total. I think after adding the offensive line coach, I think it was like 2.8 million was the total to bring both. I mean, for Notre Dame being touted as one of the richest schools with all these great TV deals and whatever the case may be, it just seems now like they're making deals like a poor school or like a school that just does not have resources. And that's never been what we expected of Notre Dame. So it's weird. It's weird. And it's also, it kind of looks bad that they were whining and dining this coach if they weren't willing to, if that was the holdup, they should have just known prior to that they weren't going to pay that rather than
Right.
bringing him. Didn't they go to a hockey game? Was that what Marcus
They
Freeman
did
took?
the whole thing. Yeah.
It was like they did the whole, yeah. So they do all this stuff to see if he's the right guy. But if you were never willing to pay the price, then it's you wasted your time, you wasted his time, and
Right.
then now you've added this extra layer of complexity to the new offensive coordinator, what he's dealing with.
Someone didn't do their job. That's a great point, is that when Marcus Freeman says, hey, I'd like to interview Andy Ludwig and fly him to South Bend to interview him, someone in that athletic department goes, hey, actually, his buyout's $2.2 million, and we just simply are not going to pay that right now before you ever fly him out. Exactly. Yeah. And to your point, you say it at LSU, that's just shipping and handling. Maybe that's why Brian Kelly went to LSU.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why he did, is because you have more freedom to win at LSU. I also think I feel bad for Marcus Freeman in that you didn't let him just go be your football coach and your program CEO, because when your head football coach says, this is the guy I want, you make it happen. Like, if you want to win, you make it happen. And so I feel bad for Marcus Freeman. This is the guy he wanted. And again, I hope for Notre Dame's sake, I hope Gerard Parker is a great hire. I hope they have a phenomenal offense. I hope that it's continuity. And honestly, it is continuity for, Sam Hartman's coming in new, but he came in thinking he was going to play for Tommy Rees.
Right.
And so having a similar offense is going to be helpful for the rest of the team as well. It could be a great hire. I just think he's set up for failure because we know what happened. Like, we all know what happened. So,
and he was a tight ends coach, right? They promoted the tight ends coach.
Offensive. Let me look real quick. I think they're hiring an offensive line coach.
Okay.
No. Sorry, the offensive line coach at Notre Dame retired when Tommy Rees left. That's why that opening is up.
I think Parker was the tight ends
tight
coach.
ends. Yep.
So I mean, if you're talking about a stellar, area of the offense, it's been tight ends for the past several years. So, it has a good track record there. But yeah, we'll have to see. But definitely, the optics is the biggest thing here. It just doesn't look good. You look like, everybody's going to second guess you. Notre Dame has been able to throw their weight around as far as being a brand and having their NBC deal and having all these special things and playing footsie with, the ACC and basically, not joining a conference. They're the only team that we have to qualify as a Power 5 team that's not in a Power 5 conference every year. And it's just, if they want to run with the big dogs, they got to pay like the big dogs, and they're not. So we'll have to see how this goes. If this ends up almost relegating them to a second tier program, that could happen. But this is just fun off-season chatter. So we'll see for sure what this offense entails, if it takes a big step back, or maybe they're better without Tommy Rees. Who knows?
Miami, the Hurricanes have hired Shannon Dawson, who was the offensive coordinator at Houston. He's an air raid guy. Is Mario going to take his hands off the offense?
I can't see that happening, but we'll see. We'll see. I don't think he was calling plays, though. I think Dana Holgerson was still calling plays, correct? So this is still his first time calling plays. So we'll see. I Miami is just so interesting. I they they've got to be one of the most intriguing teams because of firing Manny Diaz last year to then moving on to Mario Cristobal, all the hype being on him, and then the very bad season last year for what they were expecting. Getting rid of both coordinators, well, one leaves and you get rid of the other. And then now we're heading into this with a potential air raid system being implemented. We'll see how this goes. But I'm very interested in Miami. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm interested, and I'm going to probably be watching a guilty pleasure reality TV show. That's what I feel like I'm watching, is what's going on in Miami.
I am also very interested to watch what happens at Miami. Maryland has hired Kevin Sumlin. He's back. Kevin Sumlin has made his way around. Daniel, you mentioned, is he coaching in the XFL?
Yeah, I think he was supposed to be a coach in the XFL in the spring football. I would imagine that Maryland would prefer to have him coaching spring ball if he's going to be their offensive coordinator. So, yeah, he's probably no longer doing the XFL job, but he was one of the, 8 teams in the XFL. He was one of the 8 coaches.
The Gamblers.
Okay. Houston Gamblers.
The Houston Gamblers.
Okay. And it is the XFL, right? I'm mixing them and the USFL up like really bad.
It's USFL.
Okay.
There we go.
So, well, if he wants to still do it, spring practice will be over because I think they don't start till April 15th. So he could coach until June if he wants.
I'm sure they'd love that.
Yeah. But no, it's an interesting hire. He's an embattled coach. I think that a lot is made of his failures at Texas A&M. Then when you see what Jimbo has done at Texas A&M, maybe Kevin Sumlin wasn't so bad after all. I'm always curious, Jacob. I think you are too, when an offensive guy hires an offensive coordinator. So like Loxley being an offensive dude and then bringing in Kevin Sumlin. What's the mix there? What's happening? Like Jimbo earlier in the offseason hiring. I don't think we talk about him hiring Bobby Petrino, because it was kind of during football still happening. The fact that Bobby Petrino, I can't wait to talk about Texas A&M as we get closer in the offseason, but like what's going to happen there? They got 2 huge egos that are both, that's a reality TV show right there. So anyways, what's the identity offense going to look like? Or who's going to call plays? That kind of stuff is interesting, but good for someone getting back in the Power 5 deal as an OC. Definitely trying to work his way back up the rungs there. So we'll see what happens.
Let's move on to returning production in college football. I want to tee this up with a few stats to help. So Bill Connelly, stat nerd, who you and I both love, SP Plus. Go check him out. His work is on ESPN Plus, behind the paywall. And honestly, worth it for just his content. I'd pay a subscription fee for just Bill Connelly. So as a part of SP Plus, he wanted to help calculate and to be more predictive with what actually matters with what you return to your team in college football. So he came up with his returning production. So it is a percentage of your production that you return, whether it's like total tackles, total yards, total carries, snap counts for the offensive line. So here's how it's broken down. Of your production, the percentage of returning wide receiver and tight end receiving yards accounts for 24% of the overall number. So if you break that down by player, it's a lot less by player, right? Percentage of returning quarterback passing yards accounts for 23%. So this is definitely the biggest for one player, because
Right.
most of your passing yards are going to come from one player, your quarterback. Percentage of returning offensive line snaps accounts for 47%. So one thing he actually said is he made the claim a couple of years ago that he thought that quarterback is number one, the number two most important position in college football, based on the data we have with returning production, was actually wide receiver. Like nowadays, he's gone back on that and said, nope, it's offensive line. As like snap count data has become more prevalent, he's like, it's still
Right.
offensive line. So that accounts for 47% of the total number for offense. And then percentage of returning running back rushing yards accounts for 6%. So you can see the least important position, according to him in college football, your running back on offense. On defense, percentage of returning tackles accounts for 70%. Percentage of returning passes defensed, just coverage snaps, is 14%. Percentage of returning tackles for loss accounts for 12%. And percent of returning sacks accounts for 4%. So that's what makes up the number. I'll encourage you. We'll post the link. It's actually linked below in the episode description for his article to go see the full breakdown there. But Danielle, I want us to highlight a few teams that stuck out as we're looking at this. And I know we both want to talk about this team. So I'm just going to kick it off with the team with the number one returning production in college football. And it sucks because we're trying to hide the hype here. But secret's out. It's Florida State. And not only that, Bill Connelly released his early preseason SP Plus numbers. Guess who's his favorite to win the ACC? It's Florida State. Secret's out, Daniel. It stinks. We said, as soon as the offseason hit, we're both whispering like, are we gonna do this? Are we hopping on?
Yeah.
Everybody's gonna hop on. It stinks. We might have to pick him against him now. Probably
not.
But
it's rough because I feel like we were both in early on this, and we've been saying it for a couple of years, building to this. We've been trying to temper our expectations, and then this year proved what we have been believing to be true, and now we finally saw it this year with Norvell taking that next step as a coach with this team. And yeah, I think that they're finally able to get to a point where, they're going to be a really good team. The Jordan Travis thing, it screams it screams Stetson Bennett, like a guy who embattled to start the year or to start his career, trying to get recruited over, exceptional athlete, wears number 13, rallies his team around him. Brought in transfers, did whatever they could to try to get him to not play. He split time and then ends up developing as a passer, which is extremely important. And then coming back as a sixth-year super senior. It's like almost to the T, the version of what Stetson Bennett did at Georgia to Jordan Travis. He just had a scholarship when he showed up rather than being a walk-on. So he's a little taller, but
just a little bit.
I love Jordan Travis. I think he's a phenomenal college quarterback, and I think we're going to see his best version of himself this year. I think the game's going to be slow down for him, and for a guy with that kind of speed, that is dangerous for the entire ACC. I think he has helped the growth of their offensive line. But yeah, me and you were joking. I was saying I can't wait for our stock up episode when we do with CBS Sports. David Cobb, he comes on. We usually do it in May, and I was going to say, oh man, I've got, I was all over 10-2 LSU this year. Next year's going to be top 8 Florida State. And now I feel like that's too low based on what the perception is. I feel like I'm going to have to say stock down if that's the case, which is insane to think about. But yeah, I'm excited to see what Florida State does, because I think it's more than snaps. I think it's more than good players. I think it's a culture thing that has happened. I can't wait to break them down. And yeah, I think we're probably both dangerously close to both picking them to win the ACC over Clemson this year. We will see. TBD on that. More to come.
We got to get through spring practice, but we're excited. We're excited.
Very excited. And we're already talking about Florida State having one of the best helmets in football. They got what that helmet was in the playoffs again. What if that happened? I don't know. We'll see.
So I teed up Florida State. Why don't you take me to a team that stuck out to you with returning production? Good or bad?
Alabama.
Okay.
I would say bad. They're Jacob, help me out.
So they rank
125.
125 out of
125.
133 teams now. So be careful out there. There's 2 more FBS teams this year.
So Alabama last year, obviously, number 1 in team talent composite by 24/7 Sports, number 1 in blue chip ratio, I believe. They're number 1 in both. And, they're losing Bryce Young and Will Anderson. That's the big story, right? Probably 2 of the top 4 picks in the NFL draft, 2 of the best players in college football this year. It's never good to lose that many. To a certain extent, it might be good for Alabama culturally to have kind of a hunger. So we'll see what ends up happening. But Jacob, you and I typically talk about one of these good teams, like these elite programs. They're usually in the 70 to 90 range is pretty normal. Being that far back, there's a lot of ground to make up. And I guess my biggest question is going to be quarterback, like most people would have. What's going to happen as far as that's concerned? I think that's a really big deal, more so than normal, because you're not only going from Bryce Young, it's what's left behind. Is Ty Simpson going to be willing to step up, or are they going to stick with Jalen Milroe? A lot to consider there. And you mentioned it before about offensive line and the wide receivers being a very important metric, as Mr. Bill Connelly has, so graciously mentioned. Their offensive line has not been very good. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing that they're not returning a bunch. And receivers, last year was a very poor year for receivers with Alabama. So that I'm interested to see what happens. They had a phenomenal recruiting class. This number may end up being a blessing to them being so far back on the production, giving them room to grow. I don't know. I'm not sold on anything just yet relative to what Alabama is used to. And I want to make that clear. I don't think Alabama's falling off a cliff by any means, but level of concern's high, at least.
Bama was on my list. I just wrote down that it probably won't matter because they're low every year. But this is very low even for Alabama. So I just thought it was worth mentioning. I'm with you. Like, hey, Bama's at 125. Does this mean anything? We'll see. It's Bama. They're so deep. We'll see. Probably nothing. That's what I wrote down. Probably nothing, but worth mentioning. I'll stay in the SEC, a team that looks low but is higher than that. Same vein, Georgia. Georgia sitting here at 80 in the country. Now you're going to look at that and be like, okay, 80, that's pretty low. We mentioned this is where typically Bama, Georgia sit, is in this range. Here's where I'll say, is they were 95th last year. So they were 95th coming off of the 2021 championship. Now they're coming off of the 2022 championship, and they return more than they did the year prior. So, and honestly, I did the math on this. They lost a 4,000-yard passer in Stetson Bennett. If you're like the mini fans who think that Stetson's pretty average, that you can get some better quarterback play, where would that put Georgia returning production-wise if you were to, you just add those passing yards back, and it puts them up towards like 50. So that being said, Georgia, worth mentioning, but almost as it's not low when you think about the fact that it's better than last year, which is scary if you're a rival fan. That Georgia returns more than they did, and they just went 15-0. So, yikes. I think Georgia's going to be okay, Daniel.
I think so.
Okay, where do you want to go next?
Well, I need you to let me know where is LSU at?
I'm glad you asked, Daniel. They are.
Because I feel like they're dangerously high, like number 7.
They're not 7, but I have the number to 17 on my list. They're 32, which again, if you're in that vein, that's pretty high for LSU.
I must have heard some. I haven't looked at the list. I talking through it, but yeah, LSU. There's someone who I think that's a very high number, like we talked about for that vein of team. Them being one of the big boys in the SEC, those that can swing the stick, hit and win a national championship. Um, so I'm interested to see what happens there this year. I'm not going to go all in on LSU, even though I've mentioned them multiple times, even in the offseason so far. But um, I think they got 2 great quarterbacks, and a lot of guys returned. A lot of guys came back that could have gone pro, and I think they got some good transfers in. This is going to be a good situation for LSU this year, but I think it's also you got to kind of account for people realizing what Brian Kelly did last year, and I think there's going to be some correction within the league. So, you can't necessarily expect them to win the West again. It's tough to do that 2 years in a row for any team, even Alabama. So it'll be a fun season for them.
That offense ranks 10th in returning production. So that's one to look out for. I'm going to put a big old caution sign when I say this one. And some people are going to roll their eyes. Texas A&M is 7th.
That's what I saw was 7th. Okay.
Texas A&M. Buy at your own risk. I, on this podcast, said this amount of talent has to win eventually. And while I'm not going to pick Texas A&M to go 11-1, I'm not. I'm just saying, or 10-2. I'm just saying that it's not out of the realm of possibility. And there's a possibility it all clicks. There's a chance. They got a lot of talent on their roster. And to that point, returning production, it's all coming back. They didn't lose a lot. So buy at your own risk with Texas A&M. I'll do a 2-for-1 here with a caution. Then I'm ignoring and busting through. And that is the number 19 team returning production, Texas. I'm running right through the caution tape with a briefcase full of cash and buy. Their offense ranks 3rd in returning production.
And that's losing 2 NFL backs. Of course, we mentioned that that's only 6% of the formula, so that's probably why. But I mean, Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson, that's crazy.
Caution, but it's there. Daniel, I got 2 more. Who else do you want to highlight though?
I don't have any more.
All right, I'll mention 2. Michigan as a buy. Michigan ranks, make sure, 5th.
Wow.
And we all saw what Michigan did this year. So for a team to do that and be ranked 5th, because they went 12-0, right?
Yeah.
13-0. Yeah. They went undefeated. They bring everybody back. 4th on offense, 16th on defense. So that's a buy one. Lastly, a sell. Hold on. I didn't write down their number. Control F here. Florida.
Ooh.
107th. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better in Gainesville. That team, offensive line was a strength. And outside of that, you had a quarterback who could make stuff happen. Now you don't. I don't know who's going to play quarterback at Florida, but they're going to be playing
Graham
behind
Mertz.
a very bad offensive line. They had 2 starters go to the NFL draft, 2 starters go off to USC. Like they lost everybody. Their offensive returning production ranks 103rd in the country. It was not a great team. They lost a lot of good players. Again, I think Billy Napier's a good hire. I think long term is going to work out. I think it might get worse before it gets better in Gainesville.
Yeah, I was listening to Chuck Oliver on the Chuck Oliver show a couple weeks ago, and I think he was talking to, I think, Billy Devaney, who's I think the Rivals for covers Florida. And they said something about how you almost have to treat year 2 like a year 1 for Billy Napier because of what was lost, and kind of having hit the reset button already, which is, at first I was like, this is crazy that Anthony Richardson's leaving, but now I'm seeing him mocked in the top 10 everywhere, which still baffles me. But even
Me
if
too.
he's a first round pick, late first round, it was still worth it for him to go pro, because it's like, go get your money, son. Like, you could play another year and be undraftable or something. If they're gonna draft you in the first round, go. But it still surprised me because I feel like he's got a lot of seasoning left to become, a developed quarterback, a final piece. And so the fact that he left, I think, really hurts Billy Napier, many cases. So it maybe a year 1 type situation where they have to kind of build up, like you were saying. It gets darker before it gets better. My only question with that is Florida going to be patient enough? Because they have pulled the plug real quick on other guys. Is he gonna say things and do things a certain way that gives him more time? I mean, Dan Mullen got them to an SEC championship game. Jim McElwain got them to the SEC championship game multiple times. Um, you know, shoot, Will Muschamp had an 11-win season and was a great recruiter. Will Muschamp was an elite recruiter as their head coach. He was the last elite recruiter that they've had as a head coach. They keep swinging and trying to get Urban Meyer or Steve Spurrier to walk through that door, and it hasn't happened yet. I wonder, we'll get into any kind of hot seat talk later, but it just makes you wonder if this does end up being kind of a rebuilding year off of an already 5-loss season last year. What are we looking at,
We'll see. I mean, here's the thing. Look at Mike Norvell. Give it time. If he's your guy, give it time. Like year 3, he won 10 games. Like that's very possible at Florida. They're getting their NIL stuff figured out. They can, like Billy Napier can recruit well. He can build a program well. He's already CEO mindset and gotten a lot of resources going the right way in Gainesville that's in his control. I think he's your guy. So again, caution. 2023 might not be great. It could be. You got to go play at Utah. We'll see. You beat them last year, but they were what, 7-5 this past year, or 6-6?
I think 7-5, and then they lost the bowl game to Oregon State. So I think 7-6 actually.
So you could be looking at that again, but I don't think it's time to fret if you're a Florida fan yet. So that'll wrap up our conversation. Be sure to follow us on social media and YouTube at the Extra Point Pod. We will be back next week breaking down the news that happens over the next week in college football, as well as the SEC and Big Ten are going to get new schedules. We're going to break down who should be those 3 permanent rivals for the Big Ten and the SEC. We've already had a ton of fun talking about this off air. We still haven't settled. We can't agree on it either. It's a hard thing. I'm glad we're not in charge of it.
I've got my picks pinned to my profile on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. So go check it out there. Argue with me. I've already had several people interject. I've had one Big Ten fan give me his Big Ten permanent opponents. So I'm going to go look at that and see from a Big Ten fan what that is. I only posted the SEC for what it's worth because that intrigues me a little bit more, but I'm excited to dive into Big Ten as well as we bring it to you next week.
And you can follow Daniel on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Carnes with a K. That'll do it for this edition of The Extra Point. He's Daniel and Jacob.